My name is Ciarán De Buitléar, and I founded an initiative called Gardening Well a good while back. Um, Watching Avatar with my two sons at the end, and one of my 7-year-old at the time, about 5 years ago, was started crying and said, "This is what's happening in the world, isn't it, Daddy?" And I kind of sat there and said, "Oh, I'm going to have to try to do something about this." So I'm not much of a political activist, so I started to do things, which is what Gardening Well is generally about doing things. So it's an initiative that we use gardens as spaces for biodiversity and wildlife can take hold, and those things can go together, gardening and wildlife. So really about wildlife gardening is a lot of what I do. And a lot of it, what I've done over the years, over the 5 years, so I suppose since it started, was on the social media, a fairly large social media following. But I found a lot of the social media stuff is kind of throwaway, or sometimes you're talking to yourself. Sometimes you you put things into the social media and you don't know if people are really using it or not. So a few months ago I started to pull that stuff together. So this is one of the products of that, along with my book, which I'll mention it once more again after this, but no more. Um and it's some stuff on my website about wildlife gardening, etc. So this presentation is part of that. And I've been working with schools and scouting groups in the area for the last 3 years or so in this walled garden that you can see in the picture. That's the actual walled garden. That's where I grow my vegetables. And there's a few people who use that with me. It's not mine. I wish it was. It's not mine, but I got usage of it during lockdown, and that's a story for a whole different day, a long story for a whole different day. But this session is about learning by doing and the garden as an outdoor classroom to be used, particularly with primary school children. And this stuff is transferable to older children as well. I've had the scouts up there and done things like this. And the learnings that I've put together out of that have been put into this presentation. The question might be asked, why would we bring children into gardens and teach them about gardening and ecology? I suppose maybe not by many people on this call, but if I'm asked that question, I usually say I think that things are going badly wrong in the world as regards ecology and climate change, etc. And people who learn when they're young to respect the natural environment are far more likely to appreciate it as they get older and less likely to destroy it. At least that's what I think. There is some mixed opinions on that. Science, it's very hard to prove causality. Um, and I won't go into that too much, but I believe that. And this is about giving children real contact and not lectures, and showing them that, you know, care for the environment grows naturally and can grow in them. So on we go. Some of the kids from the National School pictures used with permission. I found in different environments, I kind of got into this by chance. The local teacher just asked me, he was teaching my son Zach, the same guy who was crying at the end of Avatar. Climate Action Zach, he's called actually. He has his own YouTube channel, but that's different. I shouldn't be mentioning that. Not relevant here. He's teacher is interested in ecology and the natural environment and gardening, school garden. She runs the school garden, etc. And she asked me to come into the class. And I came into the class a couple of times, and I found that the message wasn't getting through very well. And then I tried doing this session in the community garden, and I found that we worked better, but it wasn't fantastic. And then I tried the walled garden with permission of the owners, of course, and I found that that worked particularly well. That getting kids out into a garden, into a space like that, works very effectively. They're immersed in the environment. They can hear the birds singing. They can see the butterfly fly past. They can feel the heat in the greenhouse. They can smell the tomatoes, etc. And all those things reinforce the lessons they learn. It gives the sessions purpose, and it gives it a sense of place. The reality of where they are lands on the kids very well. And there are some references in the speaker notes to the science of this, which I said I would go and check, and I did. And there are references in the speaker notes, which will be made available. I'm not going to go into a lecture on the science of education because, frankly, I'm not qualified to do so. And secondly, I'm sure you don't want to hear it. Um, but there are notes in the speaker notes on that explain how how this kind of environment lessens the cognitive load on children, especially children with special needs, which I'll get onto later, and gives them a better reinforces the teaching better than having it in the classroom or somewhere else. A class there up at the community garden, the walled garden, actually. Okay, so a little bit of background about me, a little bit more. There's a little picture in my book down below. Last time I mentioned it. The ground rule is one ground rule. You might call it two. The ground rule is no weed killer, no shortcuts. So during lockdown, when I got access to this wall garden, that was the mantra that I started with. There's no lazy path. There's no spraying with chemicals. It's all going to be done organically. I don't have the certification, but I follow principles. We save water, we compost, we do all those things, even if it's harder. And sometimes it is harder, and sometimes it's not, than doing it the easy way with the weed killer and all that other stuff, which we don't really want on our food. That shaped everything I did, including the book and all this work I'm doing now. I don't think, again, this audience needs to hear too much about that. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir at this point. So this is simply the right way to do gardening, and we grow vegetables here in this way with a lot of sustainable and ecological principles. The talk isn't really about those principles, but it's about teaching kids about them. So the format, I'll go through the format of the sessions, which could be adapted and reused, hopefully by others to do similar work. This works for me, and I've by trial and error found it out, and there is a science behind it. So the arrival is important. I find that I greet the kids at the gate. I greet them in Irish, and then I greet them in English. So tu smá lena hible. For any non-Irish speakers, a good start is half the work, which is very true. The kids, when they come into the garden, their eyes just light up. They see everything. They see everything going around them. Um, it's a very calm space, which is far from accidental. It's an engineered microclimate as a what I call maybe a factory for plants. And the plants aren't the only thing that grow in there. The learning grows in there as well. So greet them at the gate, say hello, tell them where they are. I give them a bit of the history of the wall garden and how I got it and all that. I'll spare you guys those details now. So when we get inside, a little bit of safety stuff. I don't go over the top. The teachers are with them. I run the session. The teachers are with them, and the teachers take a relatively passive role. Um, I welcome. I tell them things like, "This is a nettle. That's gonna sting you," without trying to scare them. This is a thistle. This is spiky. So please just be careful, kids, before you touch something. Just ask me, is it okay? Because, it might sting you. And I really, really don't want to frighten them or put them off. But I think getting stung by a nettle might put them off more than me warning them off it. So once they know where they can go and what the rules are, I tell them to stay near me as much as they can, listen to their teachers, listen to me, be careful. And they tend not to wander off. They tend to start paying attention. And everybody is safe. The One of the keys to these sessions, which are normally 40 minutes, 50 minutes long, because they're in a kind of a between classes in the school. They usually walk up from the school, which is around the corner in Stamullen here. I keep the whole thing fairly simple and I bring in two tasks, very, very simple and accessible tasks, and everyone belongs in the session. Nobody's excluded. All the children are encouraged to take part and ask questions whenever they like. And sometimes it gets too much and I might have to shut it down for a while, but I think that's a very, very important aspect to welcome questions, any kind of questions, and to try to answer them on the spot if possible. I find that an awful lot of the content of these sessions is the children's questions, and in fact, I will encourage them to ask questions. Sometimes if I have something to give away, I'll say I'll have one of these. It might be a little save the bees sign or something. I'll have one of these for somebody at the end who asks the best question during. That's them asking questions is them telling me what they need to know, rather than me telling them what I think they need to know. So I think that works extremely well, and it's usually very active. So the first thing I normally do is to do an observation in the greenhouse. And it's a very, very simple task. There's nothing complicated here. Primary school children, I don't want to give them things they're going to struggle with, things that take ages to set up, messy, too much hassle. The school wouldn't come back. The kids wouldn't enjoy it. Observation. The second one is in the greenhouse. We do some looking at the greenhouse and bringing some materials to that. There'll be some more information on those particular tasks there, which are, I think, the two key most important tasks in my list. And I have a list of 10 tasks at the end that you can, take away and use for yourselves. Any of them that you want. I've notes on those as well as how to put them together based on my experience. So in between the two tasks, we kind of walk around and I encourage the kids to ask questions. I try to pick something a bit dramatic to do on the way. I'll come back to that later. It's surprising what can be dramatic to kids who might not have seen a garden before or seen plants growing before or eaten things from, live things growing before. But it is the smallest things to a gardener can be very, very interesting to kids, young kids that age. And definitely make sure they're encouraged to ask questions and never shut down a question unless we're just getting bombarded and we have to move on. Yeah, no, don't be afraid to say, I don't know. Kid asks you a question. I don't know the answer. I'll find out. Does anybody here know? One of the kids might stick up the hand. Happened before, many times. Or I'll find out later and I'll get back to the teacher and give them the answer. So it's very important that all those questions get answered. I think I can always find out the answer afterwards, even if I don't know. And I've no formal training in this stuff, so I don't think that's needed here. I think you just need to know what you're talking about and the bits you're talking about. You don't need a PhD. If you have one, that's much better, I guess, but not everybody does. So I run the sessions on my own with the safety of having teachers there, and the teachers have to be there. There has to be the right number of teachers, and the school organizes that. This is a private garden, not mine, and the school has insurance to cover the kids on away trips. So the insurance is looked after. So you don't need to just cover that off if you're doing something like this. So we stick in one group, we go around, we have the two tasks that the teachers supervise. I'll normally mention a few things to the teachers beforehand and not be doing it in front of the kids on the day. But the teachers are there to supervise and make sure nobody escapes or anything like that. Never happened so far anyway. Um, it's a very realistic approach. I can just go down there, take a break from work, run down. I work from home. I can go down. I can be back in about an hour, and I can do one of these. I usually do them in the mornings because I work with American companies in the afternoon. But it's very easy to run if the place is near you and there's no big overhead. You don't need a big team or anything like that. With a structure like this. So why does this work? It's just less talking and more focus and doing some things and seeing the things. Um, Sometimes I'll just leave the kids to go and start talking about something or start looking at things. I don't necessarily feel the need to talk all of the time. I'll sometimes just let them look at the greenhouse and I'll delay on my way from A to B so they get there before me. And often appoint one of the kids to lead the way, and I'll try to pretend I need to do something, but let them go down and look and start talking amongst themselves because if they discover things themselves, I think they'll never forget them. I do give them guidance along the way and attention to their questions. Okay. So the observation, that's me in the greenhouse. It's a corrugated plastic greenhouse that had a bit of a run in with a storm a couple of years ago, but we replaced the roof. There's a lot of the kids in there. They have little clipboards there. They don't have to do that. Some of the teachers would do that and ask them to fill in particular questions. It's not really something that I have great detail on that part, but some of the teachers have done that. But I'll go into the bits that I know all about. Um, the task will really start outside. And before we get into the greenhouse, I'll just say, just notice the atmosphere around you. You know, notice the wind, notice the temperature. What can you hear? What can you see? And what can you feel? How windy is it? And how do you feel? Then we do that outside the door, or initially when we come into the greenhouse in the walled garden area. And then I bring the whole bunch into the greenhouse. It's quite big, as you can see. It's 7 meters long, but it's not really big if you've 20 kids and 4 teachers in there. So that generally brings about some laughter and some messing about. So that's fine. That's all good. We I take my time closing the doors and I kind of saunter around a little bit to let them discover the space themselves. Take them to be careful and not to step on stuff. But look, what's the big deal? At the end of the day, if a kid steps on a plant, it's a plant. We don't worry too much about it. When we get inside, when I get inside, I close the second door and I'll say, well, what's the difference between in here and outside? And I'll start getting a few answers, you know yourself. It's warmer, it's not windy, and things like that. I'll introduce on a fairly straightforward level for primary school kids, depending on the age. I might talk about transpiration of plants. I will talk about things like that. If it's warmer, the plants can grow faster and better. We can control the environment. The wind can be damaging to plants. You know, it might bring in some of the more complex stuff like the greenhouse effect, obviously being a greenhouse. Um, that will apply the wall acting as a radiator, stuff like that. So there's any amount of science you can bring in there for an older group of kids and keep it really simple for the younger kids. And I think they'll remember that because they're actually feeling it. Put your hand on that wall. Oh, it's really warm. At that point, then look, I ask for questions and I say, apologies. I don't say apologies. I just did clicked onto the next slide by accident. Then if there's some cherry tomatoes or something that I have a lot of, I will say, would somebody like to try one of these? And then there's a big queue and they all want one. Once one kid eats them, I couldn't get my kids to eat tomatoes to save my life. But I found that most of the primary school classes, most of the kids eat a cherry tomato. We pick them off and we'll give them to them. I asked the teachers beforehand and at the time, make sure there's no food allergies or anything like that. Although I've never heard anyone allergic to tomatoes, we always check. But we hand them out and they eat them and do they taste nice, that kind of thing. So that is one of the aspects that I always kind of try to bring in. I mentioned it a few times throughout. There's an experience in all the senses here. If there's no tomatoes at the time of year, we might have lettuce outside. We might rip it up and give everyone a little bit, or we might have raspberries and fruit, or we might have apples and fruit. Now we might not have enough for the whole class, but we can cut one up and hand it around. So some taste there at some point is good if we can do it. Um, okay, we're good there, I think. So from there we'll head down to the compost heap, and I'd say this is the most important part of the garden. It's the powerhouse of the garden where we make the compost, and they usually look at it and go, "Ew, it's smelly and it's yucky," and I go, "Yes, it is." And we get them up close, get them to look in. I will show them the pre-composted stuff like this, and I'll show them the composted stuff and maybe dig into it a little bit and show the wiggly worms and the not the microbes, can't see them, the insects and the creepy crawlies and all those things, which is fascinating. And most, I've never really seen them kind of be scared of it after they get close to it. And I'll explain again on the appropriate level for the age group what's going on there. Insofar as I know it, the breakdown of the plant material into the component parts that then is used to feed the garden. And it's a natural cycle. it's all alive, and the garden should be alive, and everything in the garden is alive. Very important. Billions of bacteria in a teaspoon of compost. If you pick up a teaspoon of compost and say there's billions of bacteria in there, and they break it down, it heats up, and the steam, sometimes in the winter, the steam coming off it, and wow, very dramatic. Kids may not have seen compost before, many of them. So the task then, we had the observation task in the greenhouse, very simple, everyone could do. Task here, there might be a wheelbarrow arranged. I prepared earlier, as they say, with weeds or something in it that we can get some of the kids to throw some in. It's like they all to pick up a handful of it and throw it in. And it's all part of them getting involved without giving them something too demanding to do. And they get up close, they'll see it, they'll smell it, all that stuff. Then we will move on. And on the walk back, I kind of bring them the long way around through the different paths. There's usually something in flower. There's usually something in, some fruit in fruit. There's usually some kind of vegetable we can eat. There's usually something interesting going on. And if the kids don't start asking, and they always do, I'll introduce something or several things that I believe are of interest. Something a bit dramatic at this point, like some of the things I've done, digging up a like a turnip or a carrot and pulling it out of the ground. A lot of the kids have never seen a carrot come out of the ground, and they're amazed by it. And it's incredible to go, can I eat it? Can I eat it? We might wash it off and we might hand it around, or cut it up and hand it around. Questions at that point, then that thing runs itself at this point. We move to one part, questions, we move on, depending on the time. That fills up the time. By the time we never get all the questions out of the way. It's just, we'd be there forever, which is fantastic. There's never ever had a bunch of kids in there of all ages in primary school that didn't have endless questions. Even when I wasn't a little bribe of a prize for the best question. So we're walking around, we're learning, we're observing the space. And if some of them wander off, without going too far, obviously, within sight, and they're looking at something themselves, little groups, I let them. The teachers are there. Look, they're looking after them. I've talked to them already. I said it's okay for them to go all the way around here and over there, wherever it's okay for them to go, but not up there. And there is a chicken run at the other end of that garden, which is about 100 meters up. And we sometimes bring them up there if we need a filler, and they can see the chickens, the free range chickens running around, which is usually a matter of interest. Even in Stamullen, which is quite rural, you'd be surprised how many kids haven't seen a live chicken. Now, the inclusion, very important. Won't go mad about it, but it's very important that the session is inclusive. The garden is accessible to everybody, pretty much. It's all on the flat. Kids can come in with all kinds of special needs, without listing special needs. The tasks are straightforward. If you can go into the greenhouse, you can do the observation task. If you can pick up a leaf and drop it somewhere, you can do the composting task. And most of the tasks are very, very straightforward and simple. And we don't want to give kids tasks. So I have to lecture them for 15 minutes on how to do something, how to recognize what's a weed and what's not a weed, and that kind of thing that's going to put them under pressure, to give them something very easy to do that they can take away and bring home, and perhaps bring some of this stuff home or bring it onwards in their life. Sometimes we gear things, kids will ask, can I do that? Can I do that? And try to gear it to the individual needs of the kids where possible. Obviously easier in smaller groups. Now we had, and this is some of the kids from the autism class in the local school shared with permission. And one of them has a cucumber there, which is bringing back into class. They were all going to have some of it when they got back to the class. The autism class visited, which was a highlight of my year last year. It was 7 boys, and it was really just like the other visits, but I just kept in mind that the kids had special needs, and I didn't make a fuss about it. I think this might be something that people would be a bit apprehensive about, taking special needs children into a garden. I don't think there's any needs. The kids are there, the teachers are there to keep the kids safe, and you don't need to be a police officer. No child is going to be able to run out the gate and escape. The disasters don't happen really. Um, you know, lead by their needs and their differences, I think is a key takeaway that I would give to you. One kid was very obsessed with, you know, the plant names and repeating the plant names. So I made that into a task where we were told this is the plant name and everybody said it. And there's another plant name, whatever ones I knew. And this is a plant name and everybody said it. Even tried to trot out some of the Latin names, but that was interesting, shall we say. So there was no specialist knowledge on my part there. I just went with the flow, took it easy. And it was actually my favorite visit of the year. It was the highlight of the year for me. Um, I heard afterwards that the kids didn't stop talking about the visit to the garden and they were absolutely thrilled, which was a big highlight for me. Now, onto the task bank. So we looked through there and we had two main tasks. So I built a task bank, and I would say generally pick two if you have an hour session or a 40-minute session, and then you can swap in and out those tasks as you want. So you can make up 5 different sessions with completely different tasks at 5 different times of the year to visit a garden, which you could teach the kids all kinds of everything about the garden and ecology. And some of them will involve watering, which will involve talking about rainwater harvesting, which we do. Some of them involve composting, which will involve talking about composting, which we do. Then some of them will involve planting plants. We can talk about plants, companion plants, and just bringing it in naturally along with the task. And some of the classes have been up several times. So you can use this 10, you could combine them in different ways, but that's really cheating. There's about 5 different sessions that could be done with the 10 different tasks that are listed here. And generally, I find to keep the same structure every time. It just makes life easier for me rather than dreaming up a whole new way of doing things every week or every few weeks that I do this. And it's quite easy to follow from this presentation, I hope. So the 5 core tasks that I found that work the best with primary school children, in my experience, are the greenhouse observation that we saw, the compost heap observation, and it's an observation and putting some compost on and talking about that. Watering one bed, very simple. Take the water from here and the water can there, water that bed there until it gets darker. Seed collection, very straightforward. Seed collection task. I have more detail on the specific tasks later. It's all in the speaker notes, so you may or may not want me to go into all of that. Observation of the wall in a similar way to the greenhouse. Very, very good on a hot day or a warm day, even after a cold day where it's sunny, is to get the kids to touch the wall and touch the wall inside the greenhouse, and they can see how warm it is. And they're up close to that 150-year-old red brick wall. It's quite impressive in itself. And the whole discussion then can be on a simple level that shelters the plants, or down to microclimates and um, radiator, the wall acting as a radiator at night. So various different levels we can talk about the different tasks depending on the group. And you can always often read the group and bring in a bit more if they seem to want more, or just kind of stop if they've had enough. Other tasks then we can do very simply. These help me as well because then I don't have to do them. Tidy the path, spreading mulch, sorting and counting things. The teachers tend to like that one a lot. Finding 10 things that are the same and counting up to 10, that kind of thing for the younger kids. Also, to find 3 living things, not to pick them up or to kill them or anything, but to find them and to point at them. And what are your 3? And my 3 are the moss on the wall and the bird that flew over and the grass, or whatever floats their boat, whatever in particular living things they saw. And by the end, you need to try to go and can you find three different things that the other person didn't find? And keep going that way. And you end up identifying, three times the number of kids that are there living things in the garden potentially, which is a lot. It makes people notice things, or it helps people to notice things, I should say. And a mini planting task, very, very simply, it will be to hand out plugs or seeds, big seeds. Make sure there's a line made. Make it simple. A hole, put the plug in, plant in. Keep for the older kids in the primary school, quite capable of planting a plant. If I can, I might get one of my sons to come along who's younger, or when he was younger, I should have said last year. He's in secondary school now, but I got him to come along some of the time he got released by the school, so he could show the kids some of these tasks like planting and the technique and stuff like that. Some of the kids see someone around their own age doing it, they that loses its mystery or its scariness, I suppose. And often holding kids back from gardening is they're a bit scared of it. Um, I think so. I won't go into the 10 individual tasks. I've written out how I run those 10 individual tasks in the speaker notes, and all the speaker notes will be made available afterwards. You can do anything you like with this presentation afterwards. Use it any way you like. It's there for open source for free to all of you. So the takeaway here is a simple structure with a task bank, and you can form a series of visits for kids of all ages in primary school and a bit older to get kids into the garden and to learn about ecology, wildlife, and gardening. And I think it's very important. And I think I might draw a line under it there. We're at I'm 36 minutes in, I think. So I might throw it open to questions, and you can ask me about anything or everything and anything you like.
Thanks a million, Ciarán. Yeah, if we've any questions, you can, if you'd rather ask your question, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you, or you can pop it into the chat or the Q&A below. So, question from Dave, Ciarán, did you ever think of teaching adults?
I did, and um, I'm not saying I don't want to teach adults, but I thought it was more important to teach kids, and my time is quite limited. I do have a full time. This isn't my job at all. I'm an interested hobbyist, shall we say, with this stuff. Um, but if I had the time, I would, and I actually have done so in the past. We've had at our community garden, we've had residents of a brain injury centre, which is next to it, up doing tasks, helping out with the garden up there, and so I have run community planting sessions and stuff up there. I haven't really broadened into that too much because I do have limited time, and I thought I'd get them when they're young, and I'd
Yeah,
have their life.
more
As
bang
the
for your buck.
Jesuits used to say, or maybe I shouldn't mention that. Um, I'm open to suggestions if people want to do these things. I do need to watch my time though, because my wife very rightly scolds me for taking on too many things.
Connie was asking, how did you create or find relationships with the schools? And did you ever consider going into schools to teach these sessions, that have their own growing spaces or gardens?
Well, I built
Um,
the relationships with the school and the local scout group because my kids were in them, as it happened. And I met up with the teachers, and I made it my business to um talk to the teachers and I don't know if I suggested. I told the teachers what I was doing, and I have quite a large social media presence, so that kind of led people to ask me to do things, which was quite convenient. Um, Without that, I don't know. I think finding the teacher that's interested in ecology and wildlife and gardening is the key, and building some kind of relationship with them was what I did. And I would go into schools to do these. I do have something on my website, which is a a school wildlife garden or gardening pack, which is aimed at getting schools to be able to set up their own wildlife garden with make the school garden or make a school garden and make it a wildlife garden with, I won't go into too much detail, but a little water feature and a wildflower area and etc., shall we say. Um, that is something that I would like to do. Now with infinite time, I would do all these things, but um, it's a good idea. It's on the list.
One question that I had myself,
Yeah.
if you have kids coming back, say over multiple sessions, what kind of differences might you notice in them, like in confidence or their curiosity or things like that? Or would you have kids coming back over multiple sessions?
We have done so. We have done that a few times. Yeah, some of the classes have been back a few times, and their 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 confidence in the surrounding of the place is huge when they come back. Even if they just come back for the second time. The first time they're kind of tiptoeing around and they're a bit nervous and they're a bit scared and there's things around them. And I'm sure a lot of people have gardens attached to their houses, but they don't have stuff like this going on in them. So they are a bit apprehensive, but they get really comfortable in the place. I find after, even during the first visit, I'll find towards the end, but on their second visit, and they'd be, oh yeah, I saw that. They seem to be even more interested the second time. I've found. Now I haven't had them come back loads and loads of times and bored them with it. That hasn't happened yet. But I suppose there's a limiting factor here is that having them back 10 times might not be beneficial again anymore at that
Yeah.
stage. But two or three times in a year, I think a lot of the kids, I've never seen kids in the thing, funnily enough, being bored. And I've had teachers come to me and say, "Look, how did you hold their attention for 40
Hmm.
minutes? I can't do that." And like, I've no training in being a teacher. I think it's the garden that does it rather than me, to be quite honest.
Yeah, though I mean the place probably has a lot to do with it as well. Ellen has a question, and Ellen also had a comment at the start saying congrats on the book and that she just gotten a copy and
Woohoo, you're my
sending her
reader.
congratulations. She asked, how much exposure do you think any of them have to their own gardens?
I find the odd exception in classes where there may be one, generally about one or two maybe, that have their parents are you can see their parents are mad into gardening and they grow their own vegetables and things like that. That's very much the exception. Most of the kids, I don't know what kind of garden they have. I sus I suspect a lot of the people in Stamone do have gardens. It's that kind of a place. It's a country town, a small country town. There's not people growing vegetables in their own garden, largely speaking, and their exposure to nature and wildlife is very small, with the odd exception, which is kind of up here, and the average level is quite low, which is a bit lamentable, really. I'm not criticizing those parents who I don't know, but just trying to improve that situation is kind of one of the reasons why I do this. And hopefully the kids bring it home. Kind of hoping with smuggling this into the houses, with the kids bringing it home and asking the parents to maybe grow something else in the back garden other than grass or concrete slabs or, God forbid, plastic grass. Sorry, can't believe I even said that. The teachers,
Um,
the sent teachers tend to love it, yeah. The teachers love it, and they often get a lot of questions from the teachers as well. Um, and possibly a self-fulfilling prophecy that the teachers who like gardens will bring the classes along, but you know, that's my
yeah,
experience so far.
does that go hand in hand? Like, would you ever have classes where the teachers aren't particularly interested, or does the teacher really have to have some kind of initial initiative towards it?
I think that the teachers would bring the classes up because it's an interesting thing for everybody to do. If they hate being outside, they're frightened of bees, and they don't like wildlife and nature, they're probably not going to do it.
Yeah.
There's very few people on that end of the spectrum, though. I always talk about moving people along that spectrum from being the nature hater to being the Greta Thunberg over here. So we can move them a little bit that way. We can move everybody a little bit that way, and then everyone will be closer over there and the world will be a better place. But there's very few people like that. But people who tolerate being outside, they seem to be interested enough. It's actually a historical wall garden. It's been there for I don't even know how long, 150 years, right in the middle of Stamullen. And I actually never knew what it was. And I'd walked past it 100 times. I lived here 25 years, 20 years before I saw inside this place. And I think most people in the village have never seen inside it. So there's a curiosity factor there as well, I'd imagine. It's an interesting place, I think. And now I would say that, but I think it's an interesting place for most people.
And we have one more here from Dave, follow-up question. What was the most interesting question you were ever asked? Present question excluded.
Well, I had one day I had the kids from the autism class that were asking me to give them sums, and that's this is kind of a false answer in a way, but they were brilliant at this. I asked them really simple sums, and they were only young fellas, about 9 or so, but they were really brilliant at the sums, and I kept asking harder and harder sums, and the guy kept getting them right, but then one guy says, "I'm better than him." The teacher is looking at him. We better stop this now because we could be here all day. But you get all kinds of questions. That's hard to remember. There's so many questions.
And what's your policy? What's your policy for questions that you don't know the answer to or that you'd need to do some
Oh,
research
there's
on?
never any. Of course there is. I just say I don't actually know. I'll find out. But I asked the kids then, does anybody know? And some of them have known things that I didn't know. I don't claim to know everything. But I think it's important to say you don't know when you don't know,
Yeah.
especially with kids, because then they feel they can say it as well, you know? Like they're looking at me as an expert here, whether I am or not. It's another question. But they look at me as an expert. And to see an expert saying, well, I don't know, but I'll find out. That's my policy. I
Yeah.
find out and I tell them. And I can't find out. I don't take my phone out and start looking on the day. I don't think that's appropriate in the garden, etc. No phones allowed. But when they go back to the class, I'll send the email to the teacher and say, "Oh yeah, and the oldest plant. The tallest plant in Ireland is actually this. The tallest flower in Ireland. That was the most interesting question I got. Tallest flower in Ireland, and I've forgotten the answer now, embarrassing myself. But I looked it up afterwards. And I says, and Jimmy, who gave us the answer on the day, wasn't sure he was right. He actually was right. So I will always find out and I'll send it into the school afterwards.
Um, Lovely stuff. So, Kieran, I think we have exhausted our questions. So thanks a million for a really interesting talk. We'll pop it up on YouTube during the week, and you've very kindly given us your notes to include as well. So we'll share those. If anyone is interested in heading along to Kieran's launch, you can send me an email, brian@burnbio.com, and we will get the date in March back to you. And Kieran's book, Nature's Acre, is available on his website, GardeningWell.ie. Thanks a million, Kieran, and good night, everybody. Thanks for coming along, and thanks for your support of Burn Bio Trust. We'll chat to you
Thanks
all
very much.
soon.